Hello, colleagues, friends. Wonderful to have you in this space. Thank you very much for joining. I see many familiar faces. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Laura. Hi, Sente. And I see lots of you, Geneva, Nadia. Great to have all of you in this space. Really appreciate your commitment to be here. Many of you are practitioners, professional coaches, psychedelic integration practitioners, trauma-informed coaches, psychotherapists, educators, many different backgrounds, and you are truly committed. This session is being recorded, which you can access later. Nevertheless, you show up in this space because you like this energy creation coming together. That's what I understand from you. So I really truly honor your presence in this space, and my intention is to create value as you show up. You could be doing anything else, but you decided to be here. Therefore, I intend to create as much value as possible, and most importantly, to walk away with something, an insight that you can embody in your life and potentially to bring it to maybe your loved ones, family members, your clients, your organization, and so on. And I wish you all the very best doing that. So let's begin this with a little bit of a celebration of you for being here, your commitment to further growth, your own self, and also bringing these ideas, insights to your practice, right? So this is a celebration. I hope everyone is in a place of groundedness. If needed, I invite you to take a few deep breaths and ground ourselves to this moment and bring our attention here. So once again, welcome to this lecture series focusing on how altered states inform transformation. And during our previous lecture, we discussed about how altered states are created through many different experiences and possibilities. For an example, we looked at some remarkable individuals, those who have had certain experiences in life, and how like near-death experiences, how they have transformed them into who they are and how they inspire others through that process. In fact, you notice that we have Dr. Leona Nasser here, and I was very fortunate to have a conversation with her a week ago, and she shared with us that she has had a near-death experience and how it has transformed her life, and how she's continuing. She has even written a book. So, Dr. Leona, feel free to send you details and maybe also the link to your book if any of our colleagues might be interested to learn and understand your experiences, right? So we have such a rich, diverse um, of you coming to this space and sharing experiences, and I very much value. So coming back to our topic, you are starting to recognize that altered states of consciousness, be it a near-death experience or it is some kind of a psychedelic experience, maybe a meditative experience. There are so many different ways that we can create these experiences and make meaning and transform our life. So we are diving into this discussion today. So we are particularly focusing on foundations of default mode network, psilocybin, and therapeutic potential. And this is going to be the part one of this topic that we will be discussing in this lecture series. And there will be continuation in the upcoming weeks. Now, if you may recall, during our last session, I shared some of my own experiences with psychedelics and how they started creating transformation in my life. And we also looked at other individuals, not just only through psychedelics, but also other possibilities, how they have experienced certain altered states and how they are transformational. Now, since this is a lecture series, I have this understanding and the important responsibility of addressing this from a scientific lens. Last session, I believe, we were focusing much on experiences, and today our focus is going to be really understanding it from a scientific perspective, understanding what is happening in our body when we go through this kind of altered states of consciousness, and what does that really mean to us. So this is the focus of this session today. I would also like to make a quick note. Now you know, based on our previous session, psilocybin is hallucinogenic mushroom, if not magic mushroom, that we very often hear in the when we talk about psychedelics. You are aware that there are many different types of psychedelics, like for an example, ayahuasca, DMT, LSD. There are so many different types of psychedelics. In order for us to ground to a specific scientific framework, it is important that we focus on a specific energy medicine. So when I use the energy medicine, I'm quite literally referring to plant psychedelics, plant energy medicine. Let's focus on psilocybin because you will notice that depending on the type of psychedelic that we are talking about, the mechanisms in the body, dynamics of how our nervous system operate also changes. So what we do is we focus on psilocybin because that is one of the most accessible, at the same time most safest plant medicines that's available out there. So we ground ourselves to that, and keep in mind different psychedelics have different ways of interacting with our body, our mind. Therefore, not all information that I'm sharing here, especially from a neuroscientific perspective, would be applicable to all psychedelics. So we keep that in mind, and then we dive into this session. Um, Moving on, I would like to let you know that this lecture series, the intention and the purpose is education and harm reduction. And our focus here is healing, life enhancement, and spiritual development. And we do not promote illegal substances in any way. And as you already know that at Evolving Temple, our programs, they take place in the Netherlands. Considering that in Netherlands, there is a full legal capacity for us to operate with specific psychedelics like psilocybin, for an example. In Netherlands, when we say psilocybin, it's particularly sclerotia, which is what we call the truffle. We call it magic truffle. Psilocybin truffle is what is legal, and you can buy it over the counter. And when you do it with the right set and setting and proper preparation and integration process, we are able to create extremely valuable outcomes, creating transformation within us. And I always recommend, although we can purchase it over the counter, it is absolutely advisable that you do it with the proper preparation process, and engaging in that activity with the right set and setting, and then integrating it. Actually, this entire process is where the value is, not just consuming a specific plant medicine. Now, if you're becoming curious what this process is about, how we approach it, how we create safety around it, what are some of the protocols, and that's the entire reason why we are having this as a lecture series, not just a one-off session. In the future sessions, I will be sharing with you how these protocols work and how safety is created, and so on. Moving on, you also notice that we cannot talk about psychedelics without talking about traumatic experiences and their impact. Therefore, feel engaged. Please engage in this session with caution, because there may be some references to mental disorders, mental conditions, and traumatic experiences. Moving on. Quick recap from our previous session. So towards the end of our previous session, we noticed that psilocybin particularly, specifically creates some change in the specific parts of our brain networks, which we call default mode network. Now, today's focus is going to be much about understanding what is default mode network and how is that change created from a scientific perspective, and understanding what does that really mean to us as transformation, someone interested in transformation, or someone who is already a practitioner in transformation. So you have been very briefly introduced to default mode network during last session. Today, I look forward to further expand that and really understand in depth what this really means. And before we begin, I would like to invite all of you to a little bit of an inquiry. Whether you are joining us live or whether you are joining online, I invite you to take a few, maybe a minute or a few seconds, and think, what is sense of self? And particularly, what is your sense of self? This is what we do very often when we introduce ourselves. Usually, when we go to a meeting or a networking event, very often we introduce ourselves. And very often that's how we associate with our sense of self. I'm not necessarily asking that kind of introduction. Your not necessarily your self concept, but truly, what is your sense of self? So if we just ruminate on that for a few seconds, what is your sense of self, right? It's not something that's very straightforward. It's something that requires some reflection. So I would invite you to continue to reflect. And I am not going to answer this question because I don't think I can answer it for you, but I can give you some ideas. So I believe this question might be even more meaningful at the end of this session. And we are going to ask this question once again. And I believe when we ask this second time, it's going to be much more complex than right now. All right, so let's dive in. Um, we also, as we discussed about default mode network, we also noticed in the last session, we discussed that our placebo brain connects to a certain extent. These different colors indicate different cortices, different parts responsible for different behavior, feel, think, and operate in the world. And then when we have consumed psilocybin, this is an infographic representation of an actual MRI studies. So you notice that it hyperconnects our brain. And this is also something that you already know. Continuing on, you remember that I shared some of my experiences around how I felt myself, how I felt a connectedness, how I was saying things like I felt nothing but everything at the same time, very abstract, ambiguous talking. If you may have experienced psychedelics in such ways, it might make sense. But when I say such things like I felt everything and nothing at the same time. I think if you haven't experienced something like that, it wouldn't even make much sense. And I believe it's my responsibility to help you make sense. And that is why you're committed to be in these sessions and try to understand this world of energy plant medicines, right? So I'll try my best to help you understand that from a scientific perspective, neuroscientific, psychological perspective, hoping that will be valuable for you. And continuing on, um, okay, my slide is a little bit now. Okay, there. Let's go back. All right. And another thing that we understood was that our mind, based on what happens to us, our experiences, our mind finds neural paths. And that's what happens when we learning to drive, when we learn a specific language. We create new neural paths, and then the more we use those neural paths, the more strong those neural paths are connected. And that's a very good thing. That's an important thing for our survival. Because when we do that, when we are able to learn, create such neural paths, and then when we are able to stick to these neural paths, that indicates that we have learned a specific behavior. So everything that you know, everything that you do comes from specific neural paths. And every time you learn something, new neural paths are created. The more you revisit them, the stronger they become. So now we are starting to recognize that it can be both a good thing and a thing that might not serve us well. Like, for an example, if some kind of a traumatic event happened to us, or if a specific need was not met over a long period of time, like a deprivation, that would learn specific way. Our brain, our nervous system will learn to behave, work in a specific way. So therefore, it's very important we recognize that our brain has the capacity to wire itself, like program itself. And some of these programs are very valuable, and some of these programs might not work in our advantage, especially like deprivation experiences and also some traumatic, overwhelming experiences as well. Now, as I'm mentioning that, you are absolutely aware that I'm also conducting another series on how trauma informs love. It focuses more on the understanding of trauma and how they show up in our life and how they show up in our clients' lives if you are a practitioner. So I highly recommend you to parallelly engage with that series as well. I believe that in they would be very complementary in terms of your growth and understanding of this world, right? So please join. In case if you don't know how to register, feel free to reach out to us. We will share with you how to do that. And we also discussed during our last lecture that when you undertake psilocybin, because it enables this neural plasticity, it opens up this hyperconnectedness in your nervous system. It's almost like the new snowfall. Sometimes we start seeing things that we never saw before. It gives us that opportunity to be able to create those neural connections in the way that serve us the most. So our session is going to continue in the same direction, understanding this from a scientific, pragmatic perspective. So today is going to be less storytelling, unlike last session, but more of scientifically understanding what is happening in our body, so that you truly gain not just only an experiential awareness, but also internal, a deeper awareness of what is happening to us, within us, as we undergo these experiences. And one another thing that I mentioned to you was that how powerful the possibilities. Sometimes some of the studies done by institutions like John Hopkins, Harvard, Imperial College London very often demonstrate the possibility of treatment resistant depression being significantly reduced. Some of the people, about 50% of the people, remission to baseline mental emotional health. And we also know that stressor related conditions like anxiety can be very well supported, like PTSD, war veterans, CPTSD, people who have been assaulted, people who have been who have experienced multiple traumatic experiences or adversities can benefit from this powerful energy medicine in a rapid phase and in a tangible way that often traditional psychiatric medication or psychotherapy, especially talk therapy, beyond the possibilities of them. And also we notice that often individuals who remission to a better mental emotional health, and also those who clinically improve their conditions, continue to retain those benefits that they receive from psychedelic plant medicines. And then we also have come to learn that people, those who are considered within the baseline mental emotional health, also gain immense benefits from improving their relationships, having better regulation, have a deep understanding about themselves, having spiritual experiences, having deeply spiritually and life meaningful experiences as they engage with psychedelic experiences. So you are very curious, and that's why you are here. The possibilities, in my understanding, I think this is the new medical frontier. It is true that at the moment in the world, we are still removing some of the stigma that had been created around psychedelic, unfortunately, because our leaders were not aware of the power of them. There's enough research now for us to recognize how powerful these plant medicines are. So therefore, I strongly believe, and I'm also seeing a shift in the entire medical industry even, many countries rapidly legalizing within certain controls, within certain clinical standards, the medicine becoming available. For an example, Australia recently enabled certain psychedelic medicines, including psilocybin, for treatment. We know that Germany is another country that is having very strong discussions around legalizing the medicine. And Thailand, in fact, in March 2024, brought down the uh, psilocybin used to be a category 1 narcotic, and they brought it to a category 4 narcotic and made it available for medicine and also research purposes. So the world is opening up. The power is already being shared among us, and we are become a pioneer in this space. And thank you for sharing this space with me. So today, let's dive into our session. So this is where we begin our session. So I threw around the world default mode network during our last session, and I think understanding that in depth and having some understanding around it is important, I believe. So therefore, let's try to understand what default mode network is. Now, I think that first question I prompted you with, the inquiry I prompted with you, what is your sense of self? That is directly hosted, right? Your default mode network is not your sense of self, but your sense of self is hosted in your default mode network. So default mode network is a set of brain regions that become activated when the mind is at rest, especially when you engage in autopilot thinking, if not self-referential thinking. These specific parts of the brain regions become activated. Like for an example, if you're driving, if you're engaging in activities that requires your motor control, that requires your intense focus, default mode network is not necessarily very strongly active. Default mode network is always active because how you show up in the world, how you do things, what you like, what you don't like, what you see, what you don't see, how you process combined information that is coming to you through your sensory perceptions is always scanned through thalamus and default mode network. Nevertheless, however, these regions become more active the moment you start engaging in self-referential thinking, thinking about yourself. And of course, there are many different regions of default mode network, and I would like us to look at just three of them. I know some of you are clinicians, some of you are trauma-informed psychedelic integration practitioners, some of you may be shamans. So how you might resonate with this technical terminology might differ. Nevertheless, I'll try to keep it in a balance. I will try not to be too clinical, too technical, at the same time, not too loosely only sharing experiences. So if you look at some of the elements of our brain itself, so if you look at medial prefrontal cortex, which is associated with self-referential thinking, so then you realize it's obviously part of our default mode network, where your sense of self is hosted. And posterior cingulate cortex linked to integrating information about self and environment. Very important, because whether you like something or dislike something, whether you process something as a threat or a friend, they all depend, safety, for an example, depend on how your PCC is operating. And then another part, which is very important, hippocampus, plays a very important role in your memory and your emotion. Memory formation, emotion formation, and memories and emotions are usually directly connected. Now, you might also think that the brain is not that modular like that. I mean, we still have limited understanding about our brain, but we have a lot of understanding, more than ever, with the technology that is available to us. There's also certain theories that some scientists, researchers argue that brain is not as modular as we think. I very much agree with them, because our nervous system, our brain is a very complex organ. At the same time, however, through certain MRI studies and certain ways of measuring brain activities, it can be sometimes recognizing electromagnetic activities in the brain, or how much our brain is consuming glucose as we are doing a specific thing. We also can recognize under psilocybin, for an example, these parts are clearly active, either through consumption of glucose or through electromagnetic activity, right? So while we are open to the idea that it is not fully modular, we are also aware that specific parts of the brain actually get activated, and so that we know that this specific part is what is most active in this case. That's how we determine what default mode network is. What are the areas of our brain that become activated during we do self-referential thinking, for an example. And why I'm going on talking about default mode network, because when we talk about especially psilocybin, if not, I will be introducing very soon serotonergic related, plant medicines, psychedelic medicines that directly impact serotonergic systems, our regulatory systems in our body, is directly connected to default mode network. And default mode network plays a key role in both clinical possibilities as well as spiritual, metaphysical possibilities as well. So learning about default mode network is very important if you would like to have a deep understanding. So now I'm going to bring you back to your high school. Many of you have learned biology. You learned about neuroscience. You learned about your nervous system. You learned about neurons. You learned about neurochemicals. Many of you when you were in high school. And some of you pursued clinical education, as a psychologist, maybe psychotherapist, counselor, biologist, whichever the direction that you went in. I believe that many of you are aware. Sometimes it's better for us to bring that knowledge to the surface, right? So these very simple concepts, and I would like to bring them, surface them to our forefront of our mind, to our processing unit in our prefrontal cortex, so that we are able to make sense how default mode network and the rest of the nervous system is directly interacting with these powerful energy medicines. So as you're aware, in this session, we are grounding ourselves to psilocybin, which is hallucinogenic mushroom. And when we say hallucinogenic mushroom, there are also very different types of hallucinogenic mushrooms as well. To give you an example, you may have seen the red cap with the little white dots. You may already have heard the name. That's Amanita muscaria. It has a different type of different chemical combination inside of it. So it doesn't necessarily interact with the exact same way how psilocybin interacts with the body. It has a different set of chemicals in it, and they impact different types of systems in the body. However, since psilocybin is one of the most common, at the same time most safest psychedelics, let's ground ourselves to psilocybin. One of the other compounds that are very close to psilocybin is ayahuasca and DMT. Very similar, but also at the same time, there are differences as well. I hope if these 12 lecture series provide us enough space, I would love to introduce those at least briefly as well. But right now, we are grounding ourselves to psilocybin, and this is once again for education and harm reduction purposes only. And I would like to also remind all of you, if you would like to experience these things, it is absolutely important that you do that in a right legal environment, so that you have full safety in case if there was any emergency, that you can receive the right health care. It can be covered by a insurance, and being in the legal environment is absolutely very important. Continuing on. So like I said, it's maybe middle school biology. Let's look at a neuron. So when we look at a neuron, we know that in our entire nervous system predominantly is made out of neurons, the smallest unit that is in our nervous system that enables us to communicate through the body. So for an example, if there was no connection between my hand and my head, my hand will not know, my hand will be disconnected from my head. So if it is still has motor control, I wouldn't know what my hand is doing, right? So it's absolutely important for us to have that congruence in our entire body. So the neurons are those little communication agents which help us to be able to coordinate ourselves and to be aware of what is happening in ourselves, get ourselves to safety. And this is something you absolutely know. And few facts about neuron, just to remind ourselves, right? So as you are aware, neurons have different components. So for an example, it has set of dendrites. Dendrites are either connected to our sensory organs, or else to our certain glands in the body, or connected to the neuron before them. And usually a neuron, although this is a typical neuron, not all neurons are like this. Some of the neurons are longer, some of the neurons are shorter, and some parts of the neurons are not there in every neuron. So it's really interesting. And another fact that you might already know is that when neurons are communicating with each other, always it only flows through one direction. Neurons cannot send information back and forth through the same neuron. So for an example, when a neuron is longer, what is usually long is this axon. You see that this longer tail that you see, that is the axon. We call it an axon. This axon is the one that becomes longer. And through the axons, when the electrons move through it, it usually goes in one direction. We keep in mind, right? So the dendrites are important for us to recognize where the information is received, and then the information passes through our soma, which is the body, the nucleus. The soma is the body of the neuron, and then there's a nucleus in the neuron. And this nucleus is very important. There's a bunch of mitochondria coming together, deciding whether this information that was received is strong enough to create an action potential. When a neuron is communicating one neuron to the other neuron, there are two things happen. Two things. One is set of electrical pulses move within the neuron. And as it reaches the end of the neuron, which is the axon in this case, we have something called axon terminal. This axon terminal releases neurochemicals, particularly chemical signals, to tell the other neuron. So this neuron we call presynaptic neuron. The second neuron we call postsynaptic neuron. So when the information comes to the end of the neuron, it communicates through chemical to the next neuron. Okay, here is a signal. And then again, the nucleus of the second neuron decides whether it would create an action potential or not. Usually it's determined by the strength of the signal that is received by the neuron. And also another interesting fact is that neurons never touch each other literally. They never really connect directly. There's always a little space between two neurons. So basically between the axon, end of the axon, and then this side, we call it axon terminal, and this side, the dendrites, right? So the connecting, they don't touch each other. In fact, they're separated from each other, and it's a very small, for us, it's a very small distance, microscopic, right? But for the neuron itself, if you take one neurochemical, like let's say we take serotonin molecule, if you simply take a serotonin molecule, it's about 70 times, the distance is about 70 times. I wasn't planning to say all of these things, but I love sharing this information. So let me go ahead and share this with you. So it's about 70 times the space between the two neurons. So it's almost like you have to go the distance of your 70 times, but this happens in milliseconds. Imagine that. How magical, I mean, I hope you don't mind me saying that word, how magical our body, how mysterious our body is, how quickly this neural transition happens, this neurochemical transference happens. And it's also conducted by certain lipids, certain proteins, which carry, like passenger, almost like carry this neurotransmitter like a passenger, and these are the travelers. They enable that, and that happens very quickly. So your body is absolutely, truly miraculous in many ways if you really look at your body. From this microscopic, what is happening at neurochemical level, right? So we remember then when a set of electrons pass through the neuron, that is, there's an action potential. So electrons are communicating. As the electrons reach the end of the neuron, it releases certain neurochemicals to let the other neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, know that there's a new message coming. And that's how we regulate. That's how we see. That's how we do everything. So if you were not conscious about this right now, as you're seeing me, as you're hearing me, that process is happening in your body already. And at the beginning, I told you, if you would like, ground yourself to this moment. So when you took those few deep breaths, what you quite literally did was enable those neurochemicals to be released into your, we call this little space a synaptic cleft. So into the synaptic cleft, so that it communicated through your body, you felt grounded. So that's how it works. And without talking about neurotransmitters, we cannot talk about psychedelics, because psychedelics most of the time directly impact how neurotransmitters behave within the synaptic cleft, right? So let's understand a little bit about neurotransmitters. Now, when we talk about neurotransmitters, as you know, that they are chemical messengers, and they are between that little space. And usually, the little junction that they communicate, we call synapses. You hear the word synapses, like synapses, firing of the neurons. This is the same idea: electrons moving on and creating the chemicals to be released, neurochemicals to be released, so that it can communicate to the next neuron or the gland or the sensory organ. We call this a synapses, right? These are the synapses. And usually, as you are very well aware, they involve in several key steps how they regulate countless psychological and physiological functions in our body. They are always active. They're always doing something. Even when we are sleeping, they are doing something. If you're experiencing a dream, your neurochemicals are activated, in fact. If you are up and about doing things, your neurochemicals are working for you all the time. This is outside of science, I would like to say. I consider them like little magical angels in our body, chemical angels in our body. In my imagination, that's how I think about them. And I find them to be absolutely, truly adorable. Although I can't catch one of them, I wish I could, but they are all over me all the time. So I consider them as the little magical chemical angels, making us perceive this universe that we live in. And I think that's a magnificent possibility, at least from my perspective. So moving on, what are some of the neurotransmitters that we know of? So the regulatory neurotransmitters, I mentioned serotonergic system earlier. So serotonin is the system that enables us to um, ground ourselves, to regulate ourselves. And dopamine, that is pleasure-oriented, reward-focused neurotransmitter. And then we have other systems like GABA, the gamma aminobutyric acid. Do you remember earlier I just mentioned that the little beautiful, the red color um, mushroom with tiny little spots on it, which is Amanita muscaria. Now, the Amanita muscaria works with the GABA system instead of serotonin system. So that's the difference there. It enables us to do sleep and wakefulness. So that means the GABA, when Amanita muscaria acting within our body, what it does is it sedates us. So right now, we notice that many scientific researchers are coming out that Amanita muscaria can be extremely valuable to those individuals who experience ADHD, for an example, because it has that sedate, the sleep wakefulness, the capacity to it. It helps those individuals experiencing ADHD to keep themselves regulated, for an example. And then also sleep wakeful cycle is uh, influenced by acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and then learning and memory formation. You remember earlier we mentioned about the hippocampus. So directly connected to glutamate and acetylcholine again. Motor control, our bodies control dopamine, acetylcholine, certain stress hormones like cortisol as well, motor control, and stress response. Oh, there it is, right? Connected norepinephrine, cortisol. Cortisol is not a direct neurochemical in the way how we classify it. It's considered more like a hormone that acts as a neurotransmitter. Pain regulation, endorphins, alkaphalines. So these are some of the examples. If you are a practitioner, clinician, you're already very well aware of this. If you are someone who is interested in transformation, I don't think that you need to know all of this, but I believe it is my responsibility to introduce them to you if you are interested to continue your research. So moving on, you remember that we have a neuron first, which we call presynaptic neuron, and through the axon, it brings information through electric pulses, quite literally electrons moving through it to the end of the axon, which we call axon terminal. And then there's another set of dendrites. Now, between the dendrites and the axon terminal, we have the synaptic cleft, which we call synapse. So it releases the neurochemicals to the dendrite. So the dendrite has these neurochemical receptors. The receptors understand the message depending on what neurochemical was released. So if we are in a regulated state in our body, we keep releasing, let's say, dopamine and serotonin. Now, at the same time, if we are in a stressful situation, so it stops the releasing of dopamine and serotonin. Instead, it starts releasing cortisol, let's say, right? Different types of neurochemical depending on the state of being, how we are experiencing our reality, our internal and external world. And then the next, which is the postsynaptic neuron, enable the communication further, and it continues depending on the length of the neural connectivity. So this is how we are able to experience our reality through this both electronal as well as neurochemical communication that is happening in our body.